Right. Afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session where we are going to talk about Angular. What is Angular all about? So, Angular is just a framework for building dynamic web applications. You will also often hear the term single page applications used whenever we talk about um, building Angular applications most of the time. What it will allow you to do is pretty much make use of HTML, right, as your templating language, and will provide you with some extra syntax that you can use to, express your application using component-based architecture. We're going to talk a little bit more about component in a moment, but pretty much what a component will be is going to be is a component will pretty much be a custom HTML tag that you can use on your HTML page, right? And you will see that in action in just a moment. In addition to components, you will also learn about directives that Angular brings to the table, which allows you to uh, sort of like interact with elements on your page, and also see how we can bind data using things like expressions and data binding to interact with some model changes, right? Um, so the objective for this session is going to be teaching you guys about the core um, principles and components of Angular, such as modules, how to make use of components to build applications. We're going to talk about directives, expressions, services, and pipes. So you will be able to know by the end of this week how to make use of these various concepts to build an Angular application, or let's say a single page application using Angular, right? Uh, to get started, first thing we need to do is make sure that we have the Angular command line interface on our computer. Some prerequisite in order to do that will be we need to have, as usual, Node installed. It's a little bit bigger. So you need to have Node.js installed on your computer, and with that, you should be able to run commands like npm to install. What's the package we need to install? We need to install Angular CLI. Okay. Um, Type in the right. This will download and install the command line interface that you will need to interact, generate, and get started with Angular applications. Okay. Um, while it's doing that, in order to create a new project, so after you install this command, you're going to have a new application or a new command in your terminal that you can make use of called ng, and you will use the ng command to scaffold new applications. So you just issue the command ng new, and you specify your project name, right? And what will happen, just like we've seen with Rails and all the other frameworks we've worked with before, it will generate the project with the proper folder structures and all the files that you need to um, sort of like work with your application. Okay, so once you have that, just navigate to the project and you're good to go. So let's see if we can create one project here. ng version, we have version 1.6, should be good. And I can generate a new project here. Creates this folder for me. And right after generating the project, it's going to run npm install to install all the dependencies that are required by this project. Okay. So while it's installing that, how do you serve your application to kind of like see the result of what you are building? You just issue the command ng serve on your terminal, and it will make the application available for you on localhost at port 4200. Right. Great, and we can serve that. It will compile the application for us. Right, you seem not to be depending on Angular core, of course, because I forgot to navigate to the project itself. You can see that the CLI, after generating the project, will also initiate the Git repository for you. So if I do git remote v, I don't have a remote yet to set that up, but on my log, I can see the initial commit that was made by the command line interface. But let's fire up the application and see what it looks like. And I'm going to visit that at 4200. The first thing that ng-serve will do is it will compile all the bits and pieces of the application and generate, because we are writing, as you will see in a moment, we are writing all the code using TypeScript. It has to compile all of that down to JavaScript files, and then serve that to via web server. So it's still, okay, it's done compiling. Let's see if we have a server running. ng live development service listing on localhost 4200. Just open the browser and enter that. If you have everything set up correctly, you should see something like this. Okay. Now, next thing we're gonna take a look at is the folder structure of an Angular project. Right. All right. So sure, you can restart that, and then let's see. Okay. First thing we note, at the root of this folder, we have most of the files that you will find at the root of this folder are configurations files. The tslint.json is just, so tslint is a library that is used to sort of like check your code quality as you write it. So it is a linter for TypeScript. So we have some default rules that are provided to us by the Angular community to sort of like lint our projects as we work on it. The TS configuration file pretty much sets up TypeScript configurations on how we are gonna compile TypeScript files that we write in this project into JavaScript file that we will serve on the application, right? And we can see here that the target is set to ES5, which is the common version of JavaScript that is supported by most browsers. Then you have protractor conf, which is, so protractor is a tool that is used to do end-to-end or integration testing with Angular. So those are the configuration files for that. We will not be diving too much into testing at this stage. Then you have Karma, which is a test runner, and we use Jasmine to do unit tests for components and all the components, directives, and all the other things that we will be building as part of our application, right? So all those tests are ran using Karma. Okay. Then of course you have your git ignore file, editor config, Angular CLI, and now we move to the folders that we have. The E2E file, according to the way they've defined the structure, this is where your end-to-end test files will reside. Okay, but for now we will be spending quite a lot of time within the source directory. So this is where you will spend most of your time to write your applications, right? So what do we have in the source folder? In the source folder, the first thing we see is the app folder. So this app folder is the global component for our application, right? So this is where we define the main component of the application. All your assets, images, fonts, and so on will reside in the asset folders. Environment is used to kind of like set up environment-specific configurations, right? If you want some specific configuration for production or development environment, you can set them up using the files in this folder, right? And then we have an index file, right? So in the index file, this is pretty much the entry point of your application. So this is the page that gets served whenever we visit this application here, right? And this is all it has at this stage. We'll get back to this in a moment and just see how this all connects with the rest of that. Then you have a main.ts file, which pretty much loads all the modules and libraries that we need in order to work with this application. You will hardly have to modify this file unless you want to do some fine tuning or whatever, but most of the time you will not have to change this file, at least not at this stage, right? Styles.css, you can add your styles here, and then you can have some test for your application here. Okay, so that's for the file structure for an Angular application. Right, what's the next point we need to talk about? So let's talk a little bit about components. What are components? And in order to, let's not jump too much. In order to illustrate this concept, I'm going to use YouTube as an example for that, to sort of illustrate the concept of components within Angular. Now, all Angular applications are built around this component architecture model, where every element that you kind of like render on your page has to be a component, right? It allows you to keep a dry implementation of your website and sort of keep things neat, kind of, right? So when we look at this page, for instance, we can easily break it in like small sections, right? The first, at the top part here, we have a video player where we see the video that's currently being played. Right underneath it, we have a section that sort of like shows a description of the video. And we have a comment section with some comments in it. On the side here, we have some suggestions for other videos that we might consider watching afterwards, right? Now, all these blocks that you see here are stuff that can be broken down into components. So in order to build this single page here, if you are using a framework like Angular.js, you will often have to like generate the component that represent each and every sections of your page. So you'll have a component that is responsible for the video player section. You have a component for the video suggestion that you can reuse to display multiple video suggestions on that page, right? So you build this component one, and you set it up so that you can pass in some custom data for sort of like the information that you want to display within that component, right? And same for the description side of things and the comment side of things. Now, what this will look like in practical term in your HTML page is going to be pretty much some HTML tags. Obviously, there will be custom HTML tags that you will have to use on your page to render each and every section of this page. another advantage of having a component-based model is, you'll see now when we sort of like see the code structure of a component, is that you can have styling isolated to every component. So I can sort of, in every component here, for instance, we can see here that we have a link here, right? And we also have a link in this component here. So we can sort of like define styling for this specific component individually and have the style for a link defined just for this one so that it doesn't interfere with any other component. So the styling that I'm going to define for this component here will not propagate outside of the entire page, right? It's only going to be available to this component here, not the video component, for instance, right? So if I define styling for an anchor tag, it's only going to be applicable to that component. So you have that encapsulation of not only the logic for every component that you use on your page, but also when it comes to styling those various components. Right. Now, how does this look like in terms of code? If we look back to this application here, we can see that we have an initial component here. This is the app component. And perhaps let me start with the index. So this is, I said earlier on that on the index page is going to be what gets rendered when we open the page, right? But when we look at this HTML document, see much happening here. I mean, like, we don't have any markup for all the links that are quickly rendered on this page. But where are those? Where is this markup defined? All we see here is HTML tag here called AppRoot. So AppRoot is HTML, it's not HTML defined tag. This is a custom made tags that is made available to this application. The way we define this tag is by creating a component for that one, right? So this component here that we get that we render in this view here is defined as part inside of this app folder that we see here, and component, right? Now, when we open up the file for this component, we can see that it has a couple of statements in there. The first thing that we notice is import statement. So the import statement pretty much gets the component description from the Angular core. We have a class defined as part of the Angular core library, which we will make use of to sort of like create in this application what is provided to us by the Angular library, right? Next to that, we have a class called app component. So we define a class called app component, and here, right here, we have some sort of, we refer to this as metadata information, right? What this section is used for is pretty much to say what this component will be made of, okay? So every component that you will have to generate as part of your Angular application will be made of at least two parts. So you first need to have this component file, which is a TypeScript file, okay? Then you need to have an HTML template that is connected to this component. So the template will be the visual representation of this component. When we render this thing on the page, what will it look like? What kind of information will this component display? So all of that is defined as part of the template, the HTML template for that component, right? The selector here just defines the HTML selector that the selector that we will have to use in our HTML document in order to represent the specific component here, okay? So this is where we define this AppRoot component that we are, if I open up this one, that we are using in here, okay? So by putting this one here, we are saying include the component app root, which is defined as part of this application. Okay, and if we look at the component here, we can see that the template is linking to a file in the current directory called app component HTML, and this template here is right here, and this is where we have all the HTML for that component defined. Okay, so that's where you can see the links to that we currently see on this page, right? So if I remove this one, for instance, we will get back to, if I didn't stop the server, let me just serve that again. We will get back to an empty page. Refresh that. Okay, so all we see now is app component, right? So all the components that you will define as part of your application will have this format. You first define a class. This class must make use of this notation to specify what selector we will need for that, what template URL will be responsible for that, and you can specify links to style sheets for this various components. So if I were to create a component for my video player, for instance, how would I go about doing that? Now you can make use of the CLI commands to do that. So the CLI also brings you a generator that you can make use of. So let's see, ng generate is going to pull up the help just to show you what commands are available. So you can generate an application with the generate command, a class, a component, a directive, an interface, and so on and so forth. So these are all the things that you can generate with that. So what I want to generate in this context is a component, and I want to call this component. So we said we wanted to generate a video suggestions, for instance. So let's call this suggestions. Suggestions, right? So this will create some files for us under the app directory. It will create the folder called video suggestions. And if we pop open that file, that folder, let's make this a little bit bigger. We can see that we have a CSS file for that. We have a template for that, and we have a component file for that, right? So the component is defined as part of the TypeScript file. On the component that we just generated, it will sort of like import all the boilerplate code that we need for this component to work. The selector for this application was defined to this one. I can rename this to whatever I want, but I'm going to leave that like this for now. If I want to use the selector in my application, I can simply pop open the app component, for instance, and just render an app video suggestions. Right. Do it like that. When we refresh, if it works, then we can see it like that. Okay. And can pretty much duplicate this however number of time I want. And then I'll see video suggestion works, right? So at the moment, it only shows this text here, but we can obviously update this markup here so that it kind of shows us more to this component, okay? And obviously add some styling to that, right? Right. Now, something that need to talk about is the way we kind of structure the application as we move along with it. Whenever you're building your Angular application, you're gonna have at the top of the chain, you're gonna have a root component. So this is gonna be the main component that will render all the other components of your application. And this root component can represent a page, right? Or it can be just a parent component that will be responsible for rendering multiple other pages and scenarios that you will find most of the time. So pages here are just simply other components. So a page will be yet another component that you will define. Okay, so you have your root component here that's sitting at the top, and usually this root component here is required in this index application. So in your index.html file, that's where you make a reference to the root component, like we did here, right? And then in order for you to render other component, you basically have to add them to the template that is associated to this root component here. Okay, just like I did with the video suggestions right now. Our root component is defined here. In order for me to render the next components of this application, I need to do that in the templates for the app component, right? And I just list my child component like this. Okay. Now, every child component can also have in turn like multiple children as well. So we can, for instance, decide to break the suggestions component into further components. So one block that will represent this image here, one block that will represent the suggestion title, and another block that will represent the count of views and so on and so forth. So you can break that down even further, okay, and generate separate components for that. Right. So that's for components. How do you define them? And any questions at this stage?
Yeah, like to organize the CSS, like do you think there is any implementation for Sass, or is just for every component it works better with having CSS, a single file for it?
You can definitely make use of Sass to define your style sheet with your Angular application. You'll just need to like do some extra configurations for that to work. But in the settings, yeah, I'm just using normal CSS, right?
Okay.
Right. Next point that I want to talk about. So having this in mind here, if we look at this image for a second, can you guys identify what could be the root component here? We've numbered all the components. So which one here can represent the root component if we keep this diagram in mind?
The video player, maybe?
Hmm?
The video player?
What number? I want the number.
The number 1.
Right. So number 1 represents the root path, not the root path, but the root component here, because it renders the entire page. And then inside of it, we have this component that are on the same level with this one. And pretty much inside of this component here, this could be defined as video suggestion list, right? Where we'll list all the suggestions on this page. And then inside of this list, we have video suggestion items, pretty much. Okay. So that's that. Great. Let's see how we can get information from the component to the template. Okay. If we look back to this app component here, at the moment we pretty much just rendering these views. So if I want to pass in some information to my HTML template, the way I need to do that is that we can make use of expressions on on the template. So here I can have, right, so I can have the following key tag, maybe this list of videos. Right. Then probably just have a list, some items, let's say 4 videos. Oh, the shortcut doesn't work here. Let's double A target. So video 1, video 2, video 3. Right? So this here will render this list here, but I mean, it's no fun to manually have to list all of these elements. I mean, if we wanted to do it like this, we wouldn't need Angular to build this application. So we need some kind of logic to limit the duplication of code like this. So this can be replaced by this line here. So I'm going to have a list here, and I'm going to make use of what we call an Angular directive. Okay, so let video in videos, and here it will say video name. Okay, so this will assume that we have an array of videos defined somewhere. Where do we define that arrays? Well, you need to do that within the TypeScript file that is associated to this component. So I'm going to head over to that component file, and inside of here, I will define. So I will define the video is equal to empty array. I'm just going to make this a type any for now. Right, and actually, let's do it like this. Let's not complicate things. Name video 1. 5, 4, 2. Okay, get the commas like that. Now, if I modify my file here to just list the video, and what I got as a result is this one. Provided this was compiled successfully. Why do we have an empty page? Let's see. Right, template error, closing tag li. That must be in here. That's interesting. What's the deal with you? Unexpected closing tag li. It may happen when the tag already closed before. Oh, of course, silly me forgot to put the equal sign here. That should be it. Or not. Oh, interesting. Can't buy an ng4 in since it isn't a known property of Li. Right. So let video off. Let video off, not in. Okay. So that's the correct word to make use of. So what it does now is that it reads the video variables that we have defined in this component here. Right, as you can see here, we have an array here, and then we are iterating. So ngFor is a directive that allow you to iterate over a collection of objects and display them on the page. Now, this notation that you see here is what we refer to as an expression in Angular. So you can use expression to render the content of a variable onto the page. In this case, what we're doing is that we're iterating over those video arrays, and every time we pass every value into this video, and we create an Li item with this video content, right? So you can make use of expressions to render anything you want on the page. So if I do this, I can do 1 plus. This will be executed, and we'll see the result of that expression being rendered here. Okay. So that's how you kind of like get data on from your component, which can be perceived as a controller, onto your template, which can be assimilated to a view, if we think about the MVC pattern. Okay. So that's how you get information from your controllers, from your component implementation to your template. Next up, how do we send information back and forth between the template and the component itself? How does the information flow between that? And this concept is the data binding principles. So you need to, Angular provides you with a way to connect variables from your component to the template and back and forth from the template to the component. And you have various ways of doing that, right? So we have this diagram here where we have on the side here the template, and here we have a component. When we talk about component, we are referencing the TypeScript file where we define the class for this component here. Okay. The first way of exchanging data between a component and a template is by making use of expression, as you saw right now. So you pretty much open a double curly bracket, and you put in the value or the variable name that you want to display in here. So this is a information from the component to the template, right? Another way of doing that is if you can have a property, you can define a property binding where you use the square bracket to specify the property that you want to modify on that component or on an HTML markup, and you put in the value that you want to change, right? This value can come from the component as well as a variable. Okay. Another way of interacting with it is through events. So if you want to handle things like click events or any kind of event that is happening on the DOM, the way you will often do that is by putting the event that you're targeting in parentheses here. Could be a click event, for instance, and then here you specify the handler that will take care of executing the action that follows this event. Okay, so on click, maybe we want to display a message. So this function here, the handler here, it has to be defined on the component level. Another thing you can also do is two-way data binding, where you have some information that is defined as a variable on your component, And as you modify that information on your template, that information is automatically updated as well in memory at the component level, right? This is going to be useful when you start interacting with forms, for instance, in order to submit all the content that you're getting from your form back to the component, and the component will be responsible for sending that information off to whoever needs it for further processing. Okay. Now, how does this? Let's see a little bit of that in action. So if I add, we've seen how to make use of this already. I'm going to show you an example of event handling by adding this button here. Let me comment out this for now. So if I define a click event on this one, I'm going to pass this event to click handler. So, of course, I need to give this button a name. Right, there we have the button, but if I click it right now, nothing is going to happen. Okay, so I'm just going to, let's clear this for now. Okay, so when I click this, nothing happens. So the reason why nothing happens is because we don't have any handler that is defined as part of this component. So to do that, I'm just going to head over here, and in my class here, I need to define, how did I call that component? Click handler. So I'm going to define a method called click handler. And this method here is simply going to console log. Right now, when I click this, well, of course, nothing happens because I need to write it like this because we are calling a function here, right? So, and then when I click now, I can see the message here. Right? So we can also do that with the videos that we have here, where I can say, when I click on a video item, I'm just going to say this handler is a video. Okay. And to define this method in the component, what I'm going to do is display video. Display video receives a video name, right? And all we're going to do for now is console log that video name. Let's do this. There we go. Click. Great. Alan, let's try that. Now, if I click on one video, right, didn't like that. Display is not a function. Did I call that display? Of course, I called this display. Let's call this display and give that a try again. All right. So when I click on this, it tells me that video 1 was clicked. When I click on that, video 5 was clicked, and so on and so forth. So what's happening here is that by putting this click event here, like it's gonna listen for any click event that happens on any of these components, right? So when I click on that, it's gonna get delegated to this method, right? And this method is gonna process whatever it needs, right? So let's see an example of two-way data binding. Say we have form That's not going to have an action. But this form, for instance, will be used to process registration. Well, the input that we need here is going to have, let's see, value going to be equal to nothing for now. Value is going to be equal to nothing for now. And to this one, we're going to have a label for first name. Okay. ER. And we duplicate this one and we create the surname for that one. Oops. Okay. Something is wrong.
Do you need equal sign after value
In
in the
yes,
surname?
Yes, I do. Right, so we have this form here. And what we will do is that I want to display whatever gets entered on this form, right? So I want to display the first name. As being user.first name. And we want the surname. Why do I keep double typing name here? Surname. Right, so if we run this, it's going to complain that user doesn't exist, right? Because we don't have a user. But let's say we define one. User is going to be equal to first name. And the first name is going to be John. Surname. Semicolon, and that we get John Doe. Okay. Now, what I'm going to do next is define a binding on the form input. Okay. So here we'll replace this one with ng model is equal to user.firstname. Let's copy this one. Replace that here with surname. Right. What did I do wrong this time around? ng model isn't a non-property of input. Right, that's because I need to import the form. So ng model is defined as part of the form module of Angular. So I need to define, need to import that forms module from Angular forms. And I think I also need to import that into my Angular modules. Let's see what the terminal is complaining about here. Okay, so this one compiled successfully. Can't bind to ng model since it's a known It is an unknown property of input. Who did I forgot to import now? Okay, let's see. ng model. And we need to user first name. What is the sign that I forgot this time around? Okay. So app module, need to import modules. Oh, there you go. It's already there at the top. And in my imports, I need to add form. Okay, so I had forgotten to add this one here. Now, with that in place, what is going to happen now is if I start typing, it's not happy about something. Okay, so I'm going to define before we start modifying that guy. So user is going to be that one. Type any. I'm going to have a constructor that's going to have this user be equal to first name. Name. Let me make sure that I'm referencing the right values here. So we have first name and we have that, but it is not happy. If a model is used within a form tag, either name attribute must be set. Right. Okay. Like the fact that I don't provide a name. Name. Okay. So it wasn't happy about the fact that it doesn't have this. But as you can see now, we are displaying the value of this. And if I start changing this, it also changes the output that we are displaying here. So this right here is an example of two-way data binding between your view and your component, right? So as I'm modifying the value of this of this attribute here, it automatically changes as well, right there. Okay. So this is how you will often have to process form entries. So you define the object that will hold the values of your forms on your component. And I can actually comment out this for a second. Redefine it the way it was before, right? And now, so you first define the object on the component level, right? And then in your form, what you do is that you pretty much bind every input field to a given model on your component, right? So that's two-way data binding. The last section that we will cover are directive and services, and we will do that after a short break. Okay. So we'll talk about services right after a break. You guys in about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.